Clear your desk by the end of the day, Ellen. Human resources will handle the exit paperwork. The words on my computer screen blurred as I read them again. After 25 years of dedicated service to Summit Edge Logistics, all I got was a cold, impersonal email. 3 days of approved bereavement leave to bury my father had somehow translated into career suicide at 52. I looked down at my trembling hands. The same hands that had signed countless reports, shaken hands with major clients, and just days ago, gently placed a white rose on my father's casket. In the early morning silence of the Boise office, I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't fight Summit Edge directly, but I wouldn't forget this betrayal either. My name is Ellen Foster, and I had just been erased. Flashback. The funeral. He was the steadiest person I've ever known. I had said at the funeral, my voice surprisingly calm despite the hollow ache in my chest. The small church was filled with faces I recognized, old fishing buddies of Dad's, neighbors, and a handful of my colleagues who had made the trip to pay their respects. David and Catherine from my team sat in the back, their presence a silent comfort. My father had been my last living family member after my husband Michael passed away 15 years ago. Dad had taught me everything about resilience, about being like the rocks in the river, steady while the currents rushed past. The river moves, Ellen girl, he'd say while we stood in waders, the Boise River flowing around our knees. But the rocks stay steady. Be like the rocks. At 78, he had finally joined my mother and Michael, leaving me truly alone. Or so I thought. Richard Collins, my direct supervisor, had personally approved my bereavement leave. Take the time you need, Ellen, he'd said, his hand awkwardly patting my shoulder. Family comes first. The same man who now declared in his email that I had shown a failure to maintain adequate presence during critical operational periods. The empty office. The Boise office was still mostly empty, the sky outside just beginning to brighten with September dawn. I had come in early, eager to catch up on work after my brief absence. Until approximately 2 minutes ago, I was the regional team lead of the highest performing division at Summit Edge Logistics, a position I had earned through decades of dedication. I looked around at my workspace. The small cactus my team had gifted me last Christmas, the framed photo of us all at the company retreat, the handwritten thank you notes from team members I had mentored over the years. 25 years of my life condensed into a few personal items that would fit in a cardboard box. I didn't cry. I didn't slam my fist on the desk or storm into Richard's office demanding an explanation. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took a photograph of the email, then forwarded it to my personal account. Then I shut down my computer, stood up, and began methodically packing my things. Flashback. The beginning. I joined Summit Edge when I was 27, fresh from the tragedy of losing Michael to cancer. The company had been my salvation then, a place to pour my grief into productivity, to build something meaningful from the ashes of my personal life. Richard had been different back then too. 10 years my senior, he had been a mentor of sorts, teaching me the logistics business with patience and encouragement. You have an eye for efficiency, Ellen, he told me once. And something even more valuable. You know how to build loyalty. I'd watched him change over the years as new management took over, as shareholder demands increased, as the warmth slowly leached from his marriage and subsequently his leadership style. I'd seen the way his eyes now darted nervously during executive meetings, the way he would check his phone constantly for messages from upstairs. At 58, Richard was afraid. Afraid of being obsolete, afraid of being the next one discarded. But understanding his fear didn't excuse what he'd done to me. The team gathers. By the time other employees started trickling in, my desk was half cleared. Margaret from accounting was the first to notice, her silver-streaked hair catching the morning light as she stopped dead in her tracks. Ellen, what's happening? She asked, her eyes widening at the sight of my box. I've been let go, I replied simply, carefully wrapping my cactus in newspaper. What? Why? Margaret's voice cracked slightly. At 55, with 3 children she'd raised largely on her own, Margaret understood the precariousness of career and family balance better than most. Apparently taking approved bereavement leave to bury my father wasn't showing proper priority for my work. Margaret's face transformed from confusion to outrage. That's not right. Have you talked to Susan? The regional manager should know about this. No, I said, continuing to pack. I'm not going to fight it, but I won't forget it either. The silent solidarity. When you work closely with people for years, you learn to read their expressions without words. As I continued packing, more of my team members arrived. David was the first of my direct reports to hear the news, his usual cheerful expression vanishing instantly. This is bull, he started, but I cut him off with a small shake of my head. It's done, David. Richard made his decision. But we just finished the Newbrook merger last month. Profits are up 18% this quarter because of your planning. David ran his hand through his graying hair in frustration. At 48, with two teenagers from a previous marriage, he understood the value of stability all too well. I smiled sadly. Apparently that wasn't enough. By 9:30, all 7 of my core team members had gathered around my desk in silent solidarity. Thomas, our logistics specialist who rarely showed emotion, looked like he might punch a wall. Catherine, our client relations manager, was openly crying. Behind them stood Stephen, Jennifer, Patricia, Nancy, and Robert, each with expressions ranging from disbelief to fury. You can't leave, Catherine insisted, her voice trembling. At 50, she was approaching her 25th wedding anniversary, a milestone I had helped her plan a surprise celebration for. The Wilson account renewal is next week. The Hernandez shipping contract is in negotiations. None of us knows the system like you do. I finished taping up my box. Richard should have thought of that before he fired me for attending my father's funeral. The severity of what I just said hung in the air. My father gone just a week ago, the funeral soil still fresh. And now this betrayal from a company I had poured my soul into for half my life. Confrontation. I need everyone back at their desks, came a sharp voice from behind us. Richard Collins stood there, arms crossed, his thin face set in a disapproving frown beneath thinning gray hair. We have deadlines to meet. No one moved. Now, he added, his voice rising slightly. After a long moment, my team dispersed, each giving me a meaningful look as they returned to their workstations. Richard approached me, lowering his voice. This could have been handled with more discretion if you'd waited until the end of the day to pack up. I met his gaze steadily. Like the discretion you showed in firing me by email after approving my bereavement leave, his jaw tightened. Business needs change rapidly. Summit Edge needs people who understand that priorities shift. Your father's passing was unfortunate, but don't. I warned, my voice deadly quiet. Don't finish that sentence, Richard. For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered across his face. We had known each other for 25 years. He had attended Michael's funeral. He had once brought me soup when I was sick with pneumonia. Perhaps some part of him remembered that we had been friends once, before the company culture corroded his humanity. Then he straightened, adjusting his tie. Human Resources is expecting you. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. I picked up my box. Don't worry, I won't make a scene. But remember this moment, Richard. You might find it important later. Human Resources. The Human Resources office was clinical, white walls, minimal decoration, and Linda Harris's sympathetic but practiced expression. She was new to the company, having joined just 6 months ago, and I could see she was uncomfortable with the situation. I'm sorry about this, Ellen, she said, sliding separation papers across her desk, and I'm very sorry about your father. Thank you, I replied, scanning the documents. Standard severance, 2 weeks' pay, a non-disparagement clause, a reminder of my non-compete agreement which prohibited me from working for direct competitors for 6 months. Is there anything I should know about why this happened? Linda asked cautiously. This seems abrupt. I debated how much to share, then decided on the truth. I pulled out my phone and showed her the email. 3 days of approved bereavement leave, and I'm fired for not prioritizing work. Linda's professional demeanor slipped, her eyes widening. At 45, she had the look of someone who had seen corporate injustice before, perhaps experienced it herself. This is the actual termination notice? Just an email? No performance improvement plan? No documented warnings? Nothing? She frowned, making a note on her legal pad. I need to verify some things with the legal department. Would you excuse me for a moment? The River View. While Linda stepped out, I gazed through the window. From this floor, I could see the Boise River winding through the city. My father had loved fishing that river. Every significant moment of my life had been discussed standing in those waters with him. When Michael was diagnosed with cancer, Dad had taken me fishing. The current takes good and bad alike, Ellen, he'd said. But you choose which rocks to step on. When I was promoted to team lead 15 years ago, we'd celebrated with a day on the river. Remember, he'd said, a good leader doesn't fight the current. They understand it, work with it, and know when to stand firm. My father, a retired Army sergeant who had raised me alone after Mom died, had been my compass. Now I needed to find my own way. Linda returned 20 minutes later, her expression carefully neutral, but her tight smile told me everything. Nothing would change. Unfortunately, Idaho is an at-will employment state, she began. The company is within its rights to. I understand, I interrupted, signing the documents without further argument. Summit Edge can do whatever it wants, just like I can. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. Off the record, this isn't right. If you wanted to pursue action. I don't, I said firmly. But thank you. As I walked through the main office toward the exit, I felt eyes following me. My team watched silently, their faces somber. I gave them a small smile, my last act as their leader. Outside, the September air was surprisingly warm. I placed my box in the trunk of my car and sat in the driver's seat, allowing myself a moment to process everything. My phone chimed with a text message, then another and another. David, this is wrong. What can we do? Catherine, are you okay? Can we meet up later? Thomas, Richard's a spineless jerk. The team is furious. More messages poured in. Expressions of outrage, support, loyalty. These people weren't just colleagues. They were my professional family. I started my car, a plan already forming in my mind. I wouldn't fight Summit Edge directly. I wouldn't sue, though I probably had grounds. No, I would be strategic, patient, like my father taught me. The rocks stay steady while the river rushes past. My phone rang. It was George Wilson, the CEO of Vertex Transport Systems, Summit Edge's biggest competitor. We'd met at an industry conference last year and kept in touch. He'd been trying to recruit me for months. It was time to return his call. New beginnings. The Vertex Transport Systems office was everything Summit Edge wasn't. Open concept collaborative workspaces and large windows framing the Boise skyline. George Wilson, a burly man with a silver beard and keen eyes, welcomed me with a firm handshake. I've been hoping you'd call, he said, guiding me to a conference room, though I admit I didn't expect it would be under these circumstances. Word traveled fast in our industry. George already knew about my termination, though not the details. I filled him in as we sat down, showing him Richard's email. That's not just bad management, George said, frowning. That's inhumane. Bereavement leave exists for a reason. Summit Edge has always valued profits over people, I replied. I just never thought I'd be on the receiving end. George leaned forward. I'll be blunt, Ellen. I want you on my team. Vertex is expanding our Pacific Northwest operations, and we need someone with your expertise. The division director position is yours if you want it. My heart skipped. Division director, a significant step up from my role at Summit Edge. More responsibility, more authority, better pay. What about my non-compete? I asked. George smiled. Our legal team has reviewed it. It's overly broad and likely unenforceable. Plus, we'd cover any legal expenses if Summit Edge tried to enforce it. I'd need to think about it, I said carefully. Of course, George replied. Take the weekend. We can talk specifics on Monday. Flashback, father's wisdom. That evening, I sat alone on my back porch, nursing a glass of wine and watching the sunset. I thought about a conversation I'd had with Dad just a month before he died. I'm worried about the company, Dad, I'd confessed. Things are changing. The new executives only care about quarterly profits. He nodded slowly, his hands busy tying a fishing fly. Companies are like rivers, Ellen. They change course over time. Sometimes you need to find a different stretch of water, but I've invested my whole life there. He looked up then, his weathered hands pausing their work. Loyalty is a good thing, but it should flow both ways. If the current's trying to drown you, find better waters. I hadn't understood then how prophetic his words would be. Team reunion. That evening, I met Catherine and David at Riverfront Brewing, a small pub away from downtown where we wouldn't likely run into other Summit Edge employees. They arrived together, their expressions a mix of anger and concern. "How are you holding up?" Catherine asked, sliding into the booth. "I'm all right," I assured them. "It's been a challenging couple of weeks, but I'll land on my feet." David snorted. "Richard's a fool. The office is in chaos already. Nobody knows where the Henderson proposal files are stored, and the system access you had hasn't been transferred to anyone else." "That sounds like a Richard problem," I replied, taking a sip of my water. Catherine leaned forward. "It's more than that. Everyone's talking, not just our team. People are furious about how you were treated." I hadn't expected that, really. "You were respected, Ellen," David said. "Not just by us. The way Richard handled this. People are scared now. If they do this to you, their star team lead with 25 years of service, what would they do to anyone else?" Catherine nodded. "Susan has been asking questions. The regional manager looks worried." "Good," I said simply. As we talked, more texts arrived from other team members. Similar stories of disorganization, frustration, and anger at management. Summit Edge was feeling my absence already. "What will you do now?" David asked. I hesitated. "I've had an offer from Vertex." Their eyes widened. "But your non-compete." "Those aren't always enforceable," Catherine said quickly. She worked with contracts daily and knew the legalities. "Especially if they fired you without cause." I looked at them both, these colleagues who had become friends over the years. "That's what Vertex's legal team said, but it's still a risk." David's phone buzzed. He checked it and frowned. "Richard's calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Saturday. He's never done that before. The Wilson account review is due Monday," Catherine explained to me. "Nobody can find your analysis files." I smiled slightly. Those files were properly stored on the company server, but my particular organizational system wasn't immediately obvious to others. I hadn't anticipated this would become an issue, but I couldn't deny feeling a flicker of satisfaction. "I should get going," I said, gathering my purse. "Early appointment tomorrow." As I stood to leave, David caught my eye. "Ellen, if you did go to Vertex, hypothetically speaking, would they be hiring?" I paused, studying their faces. "Hypothetically, yes, they're expanding rapidly." The look that passed between David and Catherine told me everything. The legal counsel. Saturday morning, I met with Edward Mitchell, an employment lawyer recommended by a friend. His office was small but elegant, with diplomas from prestigious universities adorning the walls. I explained my situation, showing him the email and termination notice. Edward, a distinguished-looking man in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses, studied the documents carefully. "This is textbook wrongful termination," he said, removing his glasses. "Firing someone for taking approved bereavement leave could be argued as both a breach of contract and a violation of good faith. I'm not interested in suing," I clarified. "I just want to understand my options regarding my non-compete agreement." Edward reviewed the document carefully. "This is overly restrictive. 6 months prohibition on working for competitors within a 300-mile radius? That's essentially telling you to leave the industry or relocate. Is it enforceable?" I asked. "In Idaho, it's questionable, especially given the circumstances of your termination. Courts typically won't enforce non-competes when the employer acts in bad faith." He leaned back in his chair. "What's your plan, Ellen?" "Vertex Transport Systems has offered me a position. Better title, better pay." Edward nodded. "Summit Edge would have to prove that you're causing them actual harm by working there. Given that they terminated you, that's a difficult argument to make." He scribbled some notes. "I'd say proceed with caution, but don't let this non-compete prevent you from earning a living." The decision over the weekend, my phone continued buzzing with messages from my former team. The emergency Saturday meeting had apparently been tense. Richard was pressuring everyone to take on additional responsibilities to cover my absence with no extra compensation. The Wilson account files had been located, but nobody fully understood my analysis methodology. By Sunday evening, I stood in my living room, looking at old photographs. Michael and me on our wedding day. Dad and me fishing. My team at last year's Christmas party. I ran my fingers over the faces of people who had shaped my life. At 52, I was facing a crossroads I hadn't anticipated. Starting over was daunting, but staying still wasn't an option. I thought about what Dad would say. Probably something about finding new waters when the old river turns toxic. Or maybe he'd just say what he always said when I faced a tough decision. Trust your gut, Ellen girl. It's gotten you this far. Monday morning, I called George Wilson. I accept your offer, I told him. But I have one condition. Name it, George replied. I want to build my own team. If my former colleagues from Summit Edge apply to Vertex, I want them to receive fair consideration. Absolutely, George agreed. If they're half as talented as you, we'd be lucky to have them. The new chapter. That afternoon, I signed my contract with Vertex, Division Director of Pacific Northwest Operations. The salary was 40% higher than what I'd been making at Summit Edge, with better benefits and a sign-on bonus. As I left Vertex's offices, I checked my phone to find 7 new messages, one from each core member of my former team. They all wanted to meet for coffee privately. Tuesday morning, I sat at a quiet corner table in a small coffee shop downtown, waiting. David arrived first, then Catherine. One by one, Thomas, Jennifer, Patricia, Nancy, and Robert joined us until we filled 2 tables pulled together. Summit Edge is imploding, Thomas said without preamble. Richard's micromanaging everyone. Susan is breathing down his neck, and clients are asking questions. The Wilson account is threatening to pull out, Catherine added. They wanted to know why you weren't handling their renewal. I sipped my coffee, listening as each shared similar stories of chaos and frustration. We heard you've accepted a position at Vertex, David finally said. The others grew quiet, watching me intently. News travels fast, I observed. We want to come with you, Catherine stated firmly. The others nodded in agreement. I studied their faces. These people with families, mortgages, lives they'd built around stable jobs. You all have good positions at Summit Edge, secure jobs. Are you sure you want to risk that? What security? Jennifer asked bitterly. If they'd fire you for attending your father's funeral after 25 years of service, none of us are safe. Vertex is hiring, I said carefully. I can't promise anything, but I can refer you. Each of you would need to apply formally. We already have, Thomas revealed, pulling out printed copies of confirmation emails. All 7 of us, yesterday. I couldn't hide my surprise. You applied before talking to me? We trust you, Ellen, Patricia said simply. Where you go, we go. I felt a surge of emotion, gratitude mixed with vindication. Let me make some calls. The fallout. The following Monday, my phone rang at 7:30 a.m. The caller ID displayed Susan Baker, Summit Edge's regional manager. Ellen? Susan's voice had a forced calmness. We need to talk. Good morning, Susan, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. What can I do for you? I've just received 7 resignation letters, all from your former team, all effective immediately. There was a pause. Care to explain? I took a slow breath. I'm not sure what explanation you're looking for. I don't work for Summit Edge anymore. They're all going to Vertex, where you just started as division director. Her voice hardened. This doesn't look coincidental. People make career choices for various reasons, Susan. Perhaps you should ask Richard why your top performing team is leaving en masse. This is about your termination, isn't it? She sounded resigned now. I reviewed the situation. Richard didn't consult me before letting you go. I would never have approved it. That's between you and Richard, I replied, though I'm curious why Summit Edge's regional manager wasn't involved in terminating a team lead with 25 years of service. Susan sighed. Richard claimed it was an urgent performance issue that couldn't wait for my return from the Seattle conference. I trusted his judgment. Clearly, that was a mistake. I said nothing, letting the silence grow uncomfortable. Look, Ellen, Susan finally continued. I'm prepared to offer you your position back with a 10% raise and a formal apology. We need your expertise. The Wilson account is threatening to walk. I appreciate the offer, Susan, but I've accepted a position elsewhere. We'll match whatever they're paying plus 15%. It's not about the money. Then what would it take? There was desperation in her voice now. 7 key employees walking out simultaneously is devastating. The operational knowledge alone. It would take time travel, I interrupted, going back to when my father died and Summit Edge showing basic human decency instead of punishing me for grieving. The line went quiet. I thought about Susan, 56, divorced, climbing the corporate ladder with single-minded determination. I wondered if she saw her own future in my situation. I need to go, Susan. I start my new position today, and I don't want to be late. Your non-compete, she began. Feel free to have your legal team contact mine, I replied evenly, though they might want to review the circumstances of my termination first. The rise. After hanging up, I drove to Vertex's offices, arriving early to prepare for the day. George met me in the lobby, beaming. We're considering all 7 of your former colleagues, he said. Their qualifications are impressive. Interviews start Wednesday. Thank you for giving them a fair chance, I replied. Fair chance, Ellen? They're top talent. Summit Edge's mistake is our gain. 2 days later, I received another call, this time from Linda in Human Resources at Summit Edge. I shouldn't be telling you this, she said quietly, but Richard has been placed on administrative leave pending review. Susan is launching an investigation into management practices, particularly around bereavement and time-off policies. That's good to hear, I said genuinely. The board of directors is involved now, Linda continued. Losing an entire specialized team to a competitor has triggered alarm bells. They're reviewing all terminations from the past year. By Friday, all 7 of my former team members had received and accepted offers from Vertex. We met for dinner to celebrate, raising glasses in a toast to new beginnings. And to Ellen, David added, who taught us what real leadership looks like. Epilogue. The reverse within 1 year after that fateful email that had changed the course of my career, Vertex named me Executive Vice President of Operations for the entire Northwest region. My division had become the company's crown jewel, efficient, innovative, and boasting the highest employee satisfaction scores in the organization. Each of my 7 team members had been promoted as well. David now led his own division. Catherine had transformed our client relations approach and earned recognition throughout the industry. The others had similarly distinguished themselves, their talents finally receiving the appreciation they deserved. On the anniversary of my termination from Summit Edge, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was my old cactus plant, now slightly larger, but still thriving, with a note from Linda Kent. Rescued this from your desk. Thought you might want it back now. Summit Edge closes for good next week. I placed the cactus on my windowsill where it would get plenty of sunlight. Like me, it had survived being discarded and found a better place to grow. That evening, I drove to the Boise River and stood on the bank where my father and I used to fish. The water flowed steadily around the rocks, just as it always had. I thought about how a single moment, a cold email terminating my employment, had ultimately led to greater success and happiness, not just for me but for everyone who had followed me. You were right, Dad, I whispered to the river. Sometimes you need to stay steady and let the current do its work. As I looked back on my journey from terminated team lead to executive vice president, I realized my revenge hadn't been in destroying Summit Edge. My revenge had been in building something better. A workplace where bereavement leave wasn't viewed as a lack of commitment, where people were valued beyond their productivity metrics, where leadership meant empowering others rather than controlling them. The greatest revenge wasn't in tearing down what had hurt me, but in creating something that made the old system obsolete. My father would have been proud of that. Looking toward the future, I felt nothing but gratitude for the path that had brought me here, even the painful parts. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes if you remain as steady as the rocks while the river of change rushes past.